Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. I keep getting emails from photographers asking me how I go about using Topaz Labs, Denoise AI, Sharpen AI, and Gigapixel AI. Specifically, where do I fit them in my workflow? Like, what do I do first? And when I use Lightroom, do I do some processing in Lightroom, then use Sharpen, or do I use Denoise? How I go about doing it? Well, in the past, I did do a video and I talked about where you would use each of those applications in your workflow, but I really didn't do a demonstration. So I thought that's what I'll do today. And we're going to use this image. And you're probably wondering, why are you using such a lousy image? Well, it is a lousy image, but if I zoom in on the bird's head, that's a pretty interesting expression. So I'd like to do a super tight crop on the bird's head. So that's where Gigapixel comes in. But as you look at it, you could see that there is a ton of noise on this image. If I show you the information on the left, you can see that I shot it at an ISO of 3200. You may be wondering, well, you're outside. Why did you use such a high ISO? Well, actually, it wasn't outside. It was inside of a bird habitat at the Buffalo Zoo. It was very bright in there, but the bird wasn't just standing there very still posing for me. It was kind of spinning its head around and dipping its head up and down, and it was making a lot of quick movements, and I wanted to make sure that I froze those movements as best possible. So I got my shutter speed up to 1/320th of a second by shooting with an ISO of 3200, and I stopped down to f8 because it was hard to focus on that tiny bird's head that was darting around. So I ended up getting this shot. I'm not super happy with the shot itself, but I think I might really like that crop. So I have an image in Lightroom. Now I'm going to show you, I most often use these apps in Lightroom. I use them as Lightroom plugins. Sometimes I do use them in Photoshop. Maybe in the future, I'll do a video demonstrating how I would use these applications as Photoshop plugins. If you'd be interested in seeing that, let me know in the comments below. All right, so this is an unedited RAW file. And what I would typically do is anything that needs to be done and can only be done to a RAW file, I will do right away. Those things are white balance. You could do white balance, of course, on a JPEG, a TIFF, but you have a little bit better, more finer control of white balance on a RAW file. Specifically, one thing you could do is you could go to this drop down, and any white balance setting that was available in your camera will be available here. Those won't be here on a JPEG TIFF or any other type of file beside a RAW file. So if I want to choose any of these, I would make sure I did this now. Also, I mentioned you can get a little finer control because when you're working on a RAW file, you have the temp and tit sliders in Kelvin with the temp slider. And when you're dealing with, let's say, a JPEG or a TIFF, it's different. It's not going to go into it too much in this video. It's beyond the scope, but just load up your Lightroom and look at the temp and tit sliders on a JPEG and then look at them in a RAW file and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now in this specific image, I don't have to do anything with white balance. I'm okay. The other thing that you should do only to a RAW file is a camera profile, because the camera profiles will get lost when you go to a JPEG, TIFF, PSD, something like that. To open up the profile browser, you could click on these four, I call them little bricks over here. And what I'm talking about is these camera matching profiles. These are what are in your camera, and they're carried over into the RAW file. But as soon as you convert the RAW file to anything other than a RAW file, you'll lose all these. So if there's anything here you want to use, you're going to have to use it now. Also, some third-party profiles may not be available to a non-RAW file. So keep that in mind as well. So you may lose other profiles as well. With all that said, I think everything's fine as far as the profiles on this image as well. All right, my next step is I want to make it as flat as possible because the first plugin I'm going to use is Denoise. It's best to remove noise in an image as early in your workflow as possible. And you definitely don't want to go in and start adding a lot of contrast, add clarity, add texture. All that really enhances the noise, and it will make the noise more difficult to get rid of. So what I like to do is I like to decrease the contrast of the image to begin with, Because if you're increasing the contrast, you're enhancing the noise, and you don't want to do that. So you may want to decrease it. Now I don't like take the contrast slider and move it to the left. Typically what I'll do is I'll take highlights down and shadows up a little bit. On this image, it looks like I almost blew out the bird's feathers. If I hit the J key on my keyboard to get the clipping indicators, you can see that I am clipping some of the shadows, but fortunately I'm not clipping any of the highlights. If I did, there'd be red there. If I was, what I would do is I would just take the highlights down till those disappear, open up the shadows until most of that blue disappears as well. In this case, I'm not getting rid of all of it, but I'm getting rid of some of it. And I'll hit the J key again to turn off those clipping indicators. So what I want to do is I just want to bring highlights down just enough so I'm starting to see some detail in those brightest feathers. I just want to do that. So I'm actually making the image a little flatter when I do that, when I bring highlights down and shadows up. That will help Denoise more effectively remove the noise. The other thing I want to make sure I do is make sure texture and clarity and dehaze aren't moved at all. I'm not going to move anything else in at all. I'll just jump down to detail. And when I imported the image by default, it added some sharpening already. I don't want that. I want to take that right down because, again, sharpening enhances the noise. You can see how it's enhancing it. I want Denoise to start out with as little noise as possible when it goes to remove the noise. I also will have luminance noise reduction all the way down. Now by default, it added a color noise reduction value of 25. That I'll leave. It's kind of optional. You don't have to, but if I bring it down, you can see that there's a lot of color noise in here now. You can see the little blue, green, and red dots. And as soon as I put that back up towards 25, you can see that Lightroom very effectively removed that color noise. So to me, that's one less thing Denoise has to worry about. So I'll let Lightroom take care of that and call that a day. Now, obviously I mentioned I want to do a real tight crop on this. I don't want to crop it yet. Denoise works best when it has more pixels to work with. So I'm going to send the full res image to Denoise, let it remove the noise. Then when I come back in Lightroom, I'll crop later. So I'm ready actually to send this to Denoise right now. So I'm just going to right click right on the image, go down to Edit In, and then I'm going to go down to Topaz Denoise AI. I'm going to use these settings. Because it's a raw file, you have to send a copy of it with Lightroom adjustments. That copy will be a TIFF file, ProPhoto RGB, 16 bits per component, resolution of 36 because that's what my Epson recommends. I have an Epson printer, and compression none. So I'll just click Edit. And you can see on the top left-hand corner, Lightroom is creating that TIFF file with those specifications, and it will open up in Denoise. And right away, it's going to go through the different AI models. I have my view set up to comparison view, I think it's called. If I go there, you can see the last one down is comparison view. That's this 4-panel view. The top left-hand side is the original file with no noise reduction applied to it at all. This panel here is standard noise reduction. That used to be called Denoise AI noise reduction. They call it standard now. The next mode over here on the lower left is the clear mode. That one is a different type of model that uses different algorithms to remove the noise. And you can see that isn't as good as the standard. And then below that is low light mode. And low light looks pretty good. It's almost as good as the standard, but not quite. Now there is a fourth mode that isn't displayed, and let's say I want to replace clear with it, so I'll just click on clear, and that's active now. You can see it has the blue box in the lower left hand corner, and that fourth one is called severe noise. So I'll click on that, and we'll see, let that render, and it's not as good as the standard mode. Now you can see that I have the standard mode set to auto, so Denoise examines the image, looks at the noise, and then it determines the movement of these two sliders of how much noise it should remove. You can see it only is on 3, and it removed all the noise that I could see. I think clear is on auto too. That one's on, low light's on auto as well, and severe noise is on auto as well. So what I'll do is I'll determine, with everything being on auto for all 4 of those AI models, I'll determine which one is better. Then from that point, if I need to, I'll move the slider some more. So what I'll do is, this is the one I want to use. Oh no, I'm sorry. The standard is the one I want to use. It moved over here. So this is the one I want to use. And then what I'll do is I'll go to the view and I'll go to the split view. Or I'm sorry, not the split view, the side-by-side view. So that the standard one now is on the right and no noise reduction is on the left. And then I'll kind of move it around to see what I want to see. It's mainly going to be just the bird's head, right? Because that's what I was talking about. And I think actually it looks pretty good. I don't see maybe a little noise in here, and that might be in the image. So I'll tweak this up. It's at 3 now. I'm going to push it all the way up to 10 and see what it looks like. It's going to have to re-render, and that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go with that and click apply. So now we're going to have, I'm working in a collection. I had that single image in the collection. So now I'm going to have 2 images in my collection. I'm going to have the original raw file and then the noise reduced file. So let's zoom in on this. Right here, this is the original raw file without any noise removed. I'm going to go up to view and lock zoom position so that when I click on the next one, the image won't move at all. And you can see there's the noise reduced image. There's the original, noise reduced, original, noise reduced. Okay, now what's next? Well, sometimes you could just use Gigapixel because Gigapixel does some sharpening already and you won't have to use Sharpen. But, you know, it's really kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You know, if you want to use all 3, you definitely can, meaning Denoise, Sharpen, and Gigapixel. So that's what I'm going to do here. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish my processing in Lightroom. So I'm going to get Lightroom processing done. And with that, what I'll do now is I'll crop it. That's the next thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to open up the crop tool. And I want to, I'm just going to hit the X key so I get this vertical crop. We're going to go down pretty small, something like this. I want that rule of thirds line right on the bird's eyes, just like that. And I'll click enter. So this is the image that I thought was kind of interesting because the bird has this kind of interesting expression, more or less. If you could say a bird has an expression, to me, that's very interesting. So I'm going to open up the basic panel now. Now I had mentioned that you wanted to do white balance because you lose all those in-camera choices. You could see how they're gone. Also, if we go to the profile browser, you could see that the camera matching profiles are gone as well. That's why you want to do those to the raw file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to process as I normally would. I'm going to bring highlights down till I see some detail come in those lighter feathers. I'm going to open up shadows a little bit. I'm going to hold in my Option key on my Mac. It's Alt key on a PC, and I'm going to push up whites until I see stuff start to come through, and then I'm going to back it off till all that just disappears. Just like right there. And then same thing for blacks, and I'll bring that down. I'm starting to clip over here on the right, the green channel. You can see that. So I don't mind clipping that a little bit, so that's okay. Then I'm just going to eyeball it and see what it is. It looks pretty good right there. So next, typically on a normal image, I'd use texture and clarity, but I want to use Sharpen for any of that, so I'm going to leave those. I'm not going to touch those. Saturation, I will move up a little bit, just like that. Then I'm going to jump down. I don't need to do anything with tone curve, I don't think. Might come back to it though. What we'll do is we'll go to HSL color. And what I want to do is I want to make the beak of the bird a little more saturated. So I'm going to move that to the right. And see if orange does anything. Yeah, that is 2. I don't think green will do much. No. And red. So I'll just kind of eyeball it. Then I'll go to luminance and see if I bring yellow down, up, down. If I bring yellow down like that, I guess. Maybe a little more color contrast in there, just like that. I think that looks pretty good. Don't need to do anything with color grading. Now again, with detail, I don't want to do any sharpening here because I'm going to use Sharpen for that. And lens corrections, we're done on the original. I don't need to do anything there. And I'm pretty much done. The image is kind of processed at this point. I could do some more Lightroom processing down the road, but right now I'm ready to send this to Sharpen. That's what I would do next. So, or, you know, it doesn't really matter, I should say, because you could send it to Gigapixel and then Sharpen the larger image, and that might be the better way to go on this because this is a significant crop. If I hit the I key on my keyboard over here on the left-hand side, you'll see that it is now only 685 by 1028 pixels. So that isn't very large at all. So I really want to probably use Gigapixel next, and then I could use Sharpen at the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click right on the image. We're going to go down to Edit In, and we're going to go down to Topaz Gigapixel AI. Now again, I did some Lightroom adjusting. So if I just send the original, it won't take those adjustments I did in Lightroom with it. So I want those adjustments I just did, including that crop, to go into Gigapixel. So I'm going to make sure I edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. Again, it's going to be the same file attributes I used when I sent it to Denoise. And I'm going to click Edit. And again, Lightroom's creating this TIFF file with those attributes, and it will open up into Gigapixel AI. Now, with Gigapixel AI, they have different views, of course, here. The best that I normally use is this side-by-side mode. I'll put it like over here. That might be zoomed in just a little bit too much for me, so maybe I'll just zoom it out just a little bit. Bring it down just a little bit like that, and let it all render. Okay, now over here on the right-hand side, we have different ways we could express the scale. The most common way is this first scale method, where you just either double it in size, quadruple it in size, sextuple it in size, and so on. And over here in the bottom left, you can see the original image was 685 by 1027 pixels. And if I use the 4x scale, it makes it 2740 by 4108. So that's a much nicer size, which would allow me to make a larger print. With that smaller one, I'd be lucky if I could get like a 4x5, 5x7, something like that out of that. This one here, I probably could get at least an 8x10, maybe even 11x14. I could go to 6x, but just let's leave it here. Now we have different AI models here as well. Unfortunately, we can't view it in that 4-screen view, although I think I've heard a rumor that in a future update to Gigapixel, they will do the 4-panel view like they have in Denoise, so that you could see all the different AI models. At least 3 of the different AI models at the same time. So we could go through these. You can see down here settings I have set to auto for standard. Let's look at lines. This is more for stuff like architectural things that have lines in it. That one definitely doesn't look as good. You can see it's making a really funny look over here on the side of the bird's face or cheek. Go to this art. This again is more for art if someone who's doing drawing. Here's low resolution, which would more apply to this image, because it is very low resolution, and this one's taking a little longer to render. So I'd be interested to see what this looks like compared to standard. So far, standard was the best. Okay, that one doesn't look too bad. If I jump between standard and it, low resolution looks kind of a tiny bit sharper maybe, and it doesn't have as much haloing up here at the top of the bird's head. If you go up here, you can see that kind of little funny, funky little looks up here. Just a tiny bit. That one does look a little better. All right, let's go to very compressed. This one may take a long time. Oh, no, too bad. Okay, that one I don't like at all. So we'll go back to low resolution was the best. Okay, now, suppress noise, remove blur. How much of that do you want to do? What I do is I'll take note. I could always put it back on auto. But as soon as I move this, I'm going to use Sharpen, so I don't really need to remove blur as much, right? So I could pull that down. What I want to do is I don't want to make it look like it was a big blow up, like it's almost posterized, like it has hard edges, things like that. So I don't maybe really need the remove blur on at all. Suppress noise, there is no noise. You just bring that down. And I could do some, if there was color bleed, I could push it here. If there was a person in there, I could push face refinement to the right. Then it won't sharpen the face as much. Makes it look more natural. So I think with suppress noise all the way down and remove blur, maybe around 15, I think that's good. I just don't want to overthink it too much. I think that looks pretty decent. So we'll click apply. Okay, now it's going to, of course, bring us back into Lightroom, and now we're going to have 3 images at the bottom. We're going to have our original raw file. We're going to have the image after it came back from Denoise, and I did some adjusting in Lightroom. That adjusting was I cropped it, and I added some saturation to the beak of the bird and just some basic, tone adjustments. And then finally, now we have the one from Gigapixel. Okay, now I have my enlarged image. Do I need to do anything in Lightroom at this point? Probably not. I'm just going to send it to sharpen it. So I'm just going to right click right on the image, go down to Edit In, and then go down to Topaz Sharpen AI. Now, because I didn't do anything in Lightroom, I actually could send the original image right over there. But for this demonstration, I'm going to send a copy just so that I could compare it to the original image to show you the difference between the two. So I'm going to go with Edit a Copy with Lightroom Adjustments with the same file attributes I've been using all along, and we'll click Enter. And again, Lightroom is going to create this file. This is going to be the third file we're creating. And we're going to send it over into Sharpen AI. Now, Sharpen AI has different image quality modes, and it has a view where we could see 3 different modes at once, comparing it to the original image. Now we have these 3 different modes. Let's start out with motion blur over here on the far left. Each of these modes has these sub-modes, and this is the motion blur one right here, comparing it to the original one. It looks okay. It doesn't look too bad. You can see it's definitely a little sharper, and we're using auto settings. Now if I go to very noisy mode, sub-mode, and we take a look at, it looks a little sharper, but it doesn't quite look right to me. Maybe it's okay. No, I guess maybe I'm overthinking it. Now if I go to very blurry, that just looks over sharpened to me. So of the 3 modes for the motion blur mode, 3 sub modes, I think very noisy on auto looks pretty good. So next we're going to go over to this autofocus mode. This is the one in the lower left. And what I'll do is I'll compare it to the one on the top right, because that's the one I thought was best so far. Right away, it looks horrible. You see the feathers up here on the bird's forehead look horrible. So we'll jump over to very noisy, see what that looks like. And it looks a little better. Looks more natural all the way around. Actually, that one looks pretty good. So autofocus very noisy. I like that one. Now autofocus very blurry. That one is just over sharpened compared to the previous mode. So now I'll decide between these 2. I still actually think this one might be better, the motion blur mode in the top right. Now we'll just finally move to the last mode, to soft mode. And again, we're in the normal sub mode. And it looks okay, but it's not as good as the motion blur mode up here in the top right. And we'll go to the very noisy sub mode. And that one's okay, but I still don't think it's as good as the top right. And then we'll go to the very blurry mode, and it's over sharpened. So this motion blur one, very noisy sub mode with auto settings, so far looks best. Now, do I need to move any of these sliders here to tweak it, make it look better? I don't think I do. I don't think I need to remove grain. I don't need to suppress noise. I think right out of the box, this looks pretty good. So we're going to click apply. So it's going to apply those settings to that file, and we'll compare it to the original one. And then we'll decide if I need to do anything else in Lightroom to finish off. Okay, now there is the 2 modes. Now at first glance, they look alike, right? So this is the image that came back after Gigapixel. This is before we sent it to Sharpen, and we'll zoom in on this bird's face. All right, now this is after it came back from Sharpen. This is before Sharpen, after Sharpen, before Sharpen, after Sharpen. So you can see it definitely made it a bit sharper. Now what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll just finish it off in Lightroom. Maybe I'll just add some saturation right like that. Just make it a little more colorful, give it a little more pop. I'll come down to effects, give it a vignette, make that background a little bit more darker so that it's making the bird stand out a little more. And that's it. I think I'm done. So there's an example of how you would go about using all 3 of those applications in Lightroom. Again, sometimes Gigapixel, if you're going to use Gigapixel to blow something up, you may not need to use Sharpen because Gigapixel, you could sharpen it a little bit in that, and then you could do sharpening in Lightroom, which is more generalized sharpening, not as specific as maybe Sharpen is, but it still will get the job done. So that will save you that step. So that's it. That's my workflow in Lightroom. And again, in the future, I'll probably do one showing you how you would go about doing this in Photoshop with a similar type of image. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.